Particular budget has attracted a lot of attention because it has been released at a time when the pandemic is still wreaking havoc. There is no clear indication that we are out of the doldrums in terms of COVID infection rates, in terms of whether or not we will not have further deaths from COVID, and the global context, the global economy, and the difficulties it is going through. Within that context, what do you make of this budget?
Well, the most important thing is that we were made to understand in 2020, when the COVID broke out, that was a match, that we need so many assistance. And IMF also really assumed that and thought it wise that indeed Ghana needs an assistance. So they brought in the 1 billion, the relief program. And they first brought in about $100 million. And then they later on brought in about $1 billion. Just to try as much as possible to mitigate the situation. The pandemic has taken toll in the more developed and advanced countries, probably than the developing countries like us. Because before we got into the COVID, we already had a very broken economy. The economy was not in good shape. But what actually baffles me and actually put other people on their toes is that the COVID-19 coupled with mismanagement has actually put in Ghana in a very severe condition, severe economic condition. Now, a situation like this, we're looking at contraction or possibly relieving of what we call the elasticity. Usually when we are contracted like this, especially when we have our debt to GDP, hitting almost about 80% before the end of this year. The figure that was indicated by the budget was 291 billion, and that constitutes about almost 76% plus of the GDP. This was a provisional figure. This wasn't the actual figure. Because in January, somewhere around 21st of January, Ghana, the government got into the domestic market and borrowed about 2.87 billion Ghanaian cedis, which is actually also hanging on. That has not been added to the figures yet. And we are also looking at it that in the previous budget and this very current budget, government indicated that they will be going to borrow about $5 billion from the world market. And that is actually also coming to add up to our debt to GDP. Now, when it happened like this, and in a situation that the president actually admitted in his recent address to the nation, that is the State of the Nations, he indeed agreed that we had a lot of unemployment as a result of COVID and as a result of bad management. And indeed, we have to find a way, a middle line, to try as much as possible to make our economy breathe and more responsive. The sad aspect of it is that usually when we get into this situation, we have two ways a government could use. One of it would be either to use both monetary policy and fiscal policy, jointly together. And when I say monetary policy, I'm talking about using the central banking system. And when I say fiscal, I'm talking about the finance ministry system. Of course, when you spend through the finance ministry, what does happen is that you're increasing our sovereign debt. And when you are using the monetary policy, you could use the banking system. That would not involve us spending so much. So most importantly, when you get into difficult situation as a country like this, what we do is that you use the two main figures to make sure you ease up the economic growth. Let me give you a typical elected example. The latest example is what happened in the United States. After assumption of office by Biden, you realize that they have sought and they have had approval of about $1.9 trillion that they're going to give it to households and other institutions to make sure that the economy revives. And when it happened like this, they reduce their interest rate and they reduce their taxation to allow it to grow. We have a very contradictory and a very confused policy rollout in Ghana, and that is becoming a bit scary. One other thing is that, on one breath, the government was saying that when this COVID-19 and so on and so forth came forth, they decided in one way or the other to reduce the policy rate and also go ahead of it to also reduce the reserve rate. All is to allow money to flow into the economy, such that at least businesses can borrow at a much more cheaper cost, and the cost of borrowing will be much more cheaper, and it will be much more easier to run. Unfortunately, the same government followed up into the domestic market and kept borrowing from the domestic market. And while you're borrowing from the domestic market, it means that individual households and individual businesses cannot have this money to borrow from the banks, because all the banks will look at an easier way and also look at a government who is able and willing to pay. And then they would rather like to invest with the government rather than to invest with the private sector. So what is happening is that the government is crowding out the private sector in this much more difficult situation. That is aside. The other challenge that we all go through and engulf through is that during the COVID-19, the government brought in some reliefs by saying that they're going to reduce the cost of water, and they're going to give some free water, and they're going to reduce electricity bills. And at a point in time, I even realized that they were cooking for some people, you know, just to try to mitigate the situation. But it turned out to be that it's not too long. Now that the COVID-19 is having a second wave, and we're having a much more higher death tolls, and we're having high infection rate, the government is introducing what we call the COVID-19 health levy. That is to mean that all those freebies that were given, now it is time citizens have to pay back. While we are not yet out of the wounds, now citizens are going to be paying for all this liability on COVID-19. So anybody at all who has an ear should listen to me and ask a simple question. Were those monies given a freebies? Was it an intervention? Or it was a loan that was given to the citizens? This is a question we should be asking ourselves. The other sad situation is that, you remember, this hasn't been the first time we have spoken about this economy. I have done this over and over with you, over and over again. And I made you understand that the banking crisis has a ramifications, and a very tough ramifications. Today, as we sit, the budget of 2021, the government has come out with a tax that has to be borne by the banks. And the banks have to be paying 5% on the, what do you call it, the financial sector cleanup cost. Now, the banks, the question that we should ask ourselves is that, how is the bank going to do this? They're certainly going to pass this on to the services they provide to I and you and other citizens. So whether we were caught up with our money in the bank or not, now all of us are going to pay for the money that was actually go to the bank. And the government used the unpopular policy that he called the banking cleanup to clean up all the financial institutions, and now the cost is lingering, and I and you are going to pay for this debt. So tell me, if this is not a very confused policy roll out, then what would you call it? We sit here at the moment, and then we tend to feel like things are getting more harder. Industries have gone to their knees. Unemployment is soaring. People are looking for jobs. We don't even have the unemployment data because we don't even have the labor participation data. And as we said today, the government is going to increase the petroleum prices. That is the fuel, gasoline, other things. Is going to increase 20 pesos on every liter of every fuel that you buy. And this is going to exacerbate the price of fuel and the oil that we buy in the market. And indeed, don't forget, we use the same vehicles as a means of transport for cement, as a means of transport for goods from the hinterland to the city. And this is going to increase our food prices, cement prices. And the worst of it is that building is going to be much more. The way what to do with those who go to cut, you know, the sand and gravels for housing development, and having to couple with
the increase in fuel prices is going to make this commodity a bit more higher. So under these circumstances, we are moving from, a very much more, I don't know whether to say all it worse to worse situation as far as the economy is concerned. Now, it doesn't necessarily stop us there. The very challenging situation as we are confronted with is that, looking at it and projectably, we are likely to go far more than 80% of debt to GDP before the end of the year, though Moody projected, moderately about 80%. Now, what it does means is that we are not going to also get cheap borrowings in the market. And many people or many investors who will be investing in Ghana would be looking at two different ways. And the saddest aspect of it is that almost about 50% of our debt is a foreign debt. It's a debt that we owe in foreign currencies. And that makes it more complicated. Since one, our trade balance is not improving. And then two, looking at this budget, it is not actually going to give the people a competitive advantage in any way. For example, you look at the trade unionists, including Guta, who were previously fighting for space in the market. They were contesting the Nigerians for Nigerians taking over their market. Now, it will be much more competitive to possibly buy something from Nigeria than to buy it from Ghana. Because looking at the taxes the government has introduced, that necessarily means that most of the produce we're going to produce here in Ghana are going to be more expensive. Now, if Nigeria is going to have a rebate, or any other African country is going to have a rebate, there is a high tendency that Ghana is going to be a dumping ground for most of these commodities going to be produced in the West African sub-region. The other challenging too is that the Free African Trade Agreement, Ghana is likely to be at the consuming point than the producing point or than the exporting point. And all this go to tell us that we are heading towards an economic crash. Things are going to be much more tougher than we think. And I strongly want to believe that in Ghana, the technical knowledge we have in economics and finance has only got to do with how to adjust financing and not necessarily how to build economy. Indeed, let me use the president's own words to just make this statement. The president said, we know how to build economy, but we don't know how to bring a human life back. Indeed, it is turned out to be differently. It turned out to be that we know how to adjust our borrowing and go for more borrowing, but we don't know how to manage the economy. This is the challenging position in which we are. And Sena, I can assure you that Ghana is going through a tough time. And where we are leading to, I remember my last article in 2020, where I wrote that, is Ghana sleepwalking into economic crisis? Indeed. This seems like it's going to be imminent thing that we are actually facing. I see no reason why a government will come forth and say that, look, I want everybody to be signed onto a one single card. And that single card will be shared with GRE, and this card will be shared with Senate, and this card will be shared with the banks. The basic question that you ask yourself is that, what would GRE be doing with these figures? What would Senate be doing with these figures? And the very controversial and confused state of it is that Ghana up to date could not come out with unemployment rate. We don't even know our level or number of population who are even working. We could not even come up with the dynamics. And we are not also deploying our human resource to the full capacity. And we are producing under capacity. And we keep borrowing and we don't know where we're going to get money to pay back. Sena, I will tell you that we are not living in good times. Ghana is heading towards a brink of collapse. If Ghana had had the, how do you call it, the HIPIC program, Ghana would have jumped and moved onto it. We are lost with actions, and that is the reason why the government is telling you that they would like to bring back a JAPA. Because without a JAPA, I wonder how the government is going to raise the $5 billion in the market at a more cheaper cost, if not doubling up the cost for the poor Ghanaian.
So all this to you is an indication that times are not particularly good.
Times times are not good, and times doesn't look to be good in the very near future. And if you have read or if you have listened about it, most of the indications concerning economic stability, you realize that the Minister of State in charge of the finance, that is Chairman Sabonsu, was actually saying that these indicators can best be stabilized in 2024. You know, it means from now to 2024, things are going to be bad. And let me be very honest with you. 2024 is not guaranteed, and it means that we are likely to.
You are saying that between now and 2024, even if our target is that things will improve in 2024, there are no guarantees.
There are no guarantees. They are absolutely guarantees, and the reason why there are no guarantees is that their policy rollout does not bring in any confidence, because there is no way, if a situation like this, you don't apply economic contraction tools. The tools the government is releasing now is economic contraction, that is increasing taxes, and then trying as much as possible to be borrowing from the private market or to borrowing from the domestic market. These are contraction tools, and you don't use contraction tools when the economy is already contracted. That is where we have it. And now, if you are very good at projecting economy and finance, nobody should tell you, Sena, that the tools that they are bringing in, they are contracting the economy the more. And since they are contracting the economy the more, things are going to be more difficult than all of us think. That is the bottom line. And as we said, there hadn't been a policy that they had come out that would even exude confidence that I can tell you that when there is this rollout, there is a way out to go. There is one other one I can choose out, maybe to stick my neck somehow, but it depends on the implementation. That has got to do with the development bank the government proposed they want to establish. Usually, development bank should be able to give out long-term loans, but development bank doesn't give loans to private individuals. Development bank gives loans to financial institutions and not individuals. And this would also be dependent on the kind of economic state we find ourselves. Because if you have a development bank, and the development bank would have to go into investments, for example, let's say it wants to develop much more of a capital market. Now, what we are looking at is that the society or the community or the citizens should be able to have money and have reserve money to be able to invest in long-term bonds and long-term financial assets of this development bank. For them to be able to have money and then invest or pay it or extend loans to other financial institutions to be able to give out. But as we said, if you contract the economy too hard and the citizens don't have money and you bring development bank, there is a high possibility that the development bank will fail, just as we had, because development bank, most of the products of development banks are not new. Let me give you a typical example. Part of it has got to do with we're looking at financing agri. We already have a Greek development bank. What did a Greek development bank do? We have investment bank like NIB, National Investment Bank, per the name. What has the National Investment Bank been able to do as a movement to be able to turn the tide of investment within our sub-region and even the local economy? How was it able to do? So therefore, if you are coming up with development bank and the parameters and the conditions are not favorable for it to flourish, we are likely to have a bit of a problem. So to me, and where I said, I don't see any policy rollout that would necessarily give us confidence that today, even if it is hard, tomorrow is going to be good. It cannot be that until there is a change in dynamics and change in strategic thinking and change in focus. I don't know whether suddenly that has got to do with those who are our economic managers or so. But to be honest with you, the economy is not responding, and there's nothing that indicates that in the very near short term we're going to have a relief. No, from my perspective.
Well, there are two things you said that I've paid some keen attention to. You are talking about policy direction and the core competencies of the people who are managing the economy. And so far, from what you've seen, the people who are managing the economy seems not capable of managing this economy towards growth.
Yes, I feel there is a skills gap. There is a huge skills gap as far as the managers of the economy are concerned. The first time I sensed danger was the first time when we had the Moody report that was released. and the Moody was sending a serious signals to Ghana. It was then that I heard from the central bank governor, who stepped in and said that monetary would have to expand or find an innovative way of trying to expand a way of getting more revenue. That certainly means that we're going to have more taxations, and lo and behold, this has applied. And then secondly, the same monetary chief, which is the central bank governor, equally came out to say that it means that they would have to restrict expanding, that they have to restrict spending to be able to get economy boost. Sena, you don't implement these things when the economy has actually gone through a disaster. You don't do that. You don't do that. But what you do is that if you contract the economy from that angle, it means that you are avoiding the economy from growth. So that policy was wrong. And then the second aspect that I found is so worrying and strange was that when it comes to the monetary policy, which is coming from the central bank, this is one of the areas that we could use to turn around the economy when the economy is in a tight corner. So you would have expected ordinarily that the central bank governor could have actually looked at the economy and come out with a policy of actually leaving and putting in brief into the economy to allow the economy to survive. But if you hear this from the economy, from the central bank governor, then it means that possibly the two individuals are not in sync. The physical side, which is the finance ministry, and the central bank are not in sync. And possibly they might be looking at the economy from a different perspective. That is where we've gotten to. And when we have leadership confusion, and then we have economic policy confusion, then we have a problem as to how we can work out of the conundrum. That is where my problem is. And from where I sit, I see that there is miscommunications, or there is distorted communications, or possibly there is poor communications, or there's no communication at all between these two wings of economic managers. And for that matter, I am with a view that we are not getting out of the woods now, Sena. We better brace ourselves for the core times, because more difficult times are seriously ahead of us. I understand the government position of possibly deciding to increase taxes. The reason is simple. The reason is that if you want to borrow from international market, you should be seen to be mobilizing more revenue, such that the investors can be confident that in future, their money will not get stuck with you. You will be able to pay them. But you don't do that on an ailing economy, where you have your debt to GDP hitting far beyond the roof. You don't do that. Once you do that, you are crippling the economy. And once you cripple the economy, it's going to be a disaster. And I would not be surprised that from now to the next year, there are going to be a lot of agitations. Senator, there is one thing I want to draw your attention to. From 2021 to 2022, Ghana has a bilateral debt of 1.1 billion cedis to pay. And $1.1 billion to pay bilateral debt. Where is the Ghana going to get that dollars from? We don't print dollars in Ghana. So the only thing we have to do is either to borrow or possibly to look at how to possibly engineer our export base more. But looking at our pricing condition and our taxing condition, Ghana export is going to be less attractive in the international market, because it is going to go with a huge burden of a business cost. That is to mean that labor cost is going to go high. People are going to be agitated because if a living standard is going to go high, a lot of people are going to be agitated for salary increment and better revenues. Now, if that happens, this will factor itself into a production cost. If your production cost goes high, it means that your pricing in the international market is going to be higher than other countries that are using very responsible policies. And for that matter, export is going to bring in very less. And if export is going to bring in very less, it tells you that your current account will be shaken. You're not going to have much more dollars in your trading accounts to be able to pay off accruing debt. And if it's not going to happen like that, then what is going to happen is that you're going to borrow. So now let me quickly also draw your attention that it always funnies me when I do listen to the government and the regulatory agencies who go ahead closing people's organization and calling them a Ponzi institutions. Let me draw your attention clear that as at the moment, Ghana as a country, sovereign country, we are practicing what we call Ponzi financing. And let me tell you how the Ponzi financing works. We borrow to pay accrued loans or a debt that is due. So what is happening is that if we borrow today and this repayment is due next month, then we have to go and re-borrow from a different market and come and pay. So what we're doing is that we are doing rollover debt. We take a debt to pay debt. And that is what in finance we call Ponzi. So under these circumstances, what is happening is that as a country, we are doing Ponzi financing.
So we are just a bigger Menzgold.
Come again?
We are just a bigger Menzgold, maybe much
we are more than, yes,
better resourced.
We are now bigger, we are larger than Menzgold, and now we are doing Menzgold. So if we have a regulatory body threatening an institution for doing Ponzi financing, I think that people should first challenge the Ghanaian capacity of equally doing Ponzi financing, which of course doesn't give us a moral right to close such institution. And that is how far our country has come up to. It is very pathetic, Sena. Sometimes when I speak about it, I get worried. But I strongly believe that people will relate with it. And possibly, it is we who gave a government a mandate. In future, we'll think about it and see whichever way forward we have to go, Sena.
Let me end by asking you about, because I'm sure that your conclusions on the Dr. Bawumia Kenoforiata financial management strategy are clear. You have indicated that you are not sure this is the way to go. One of the things they have been priding themselves in is that they have been better managers of our debt. They talk about the rate of accumulation of debt. That shows that they have accumulated the debt at a lower rate than other governments. Have you heard that? How does that sound to you?
I mean, it sounds very funny. And when they talk about rate, I don't know whether they know rate is what we call frequency. And if it is about frequency, I strongly believe that they borrow in between times far faster than any other analogy I might have ever seen. And let me let you understand this. If you are a debt manager, it doesn't make you economic manager. We've got so many businessmen who suddenly know, at certain times, even what they do is that they borrow from one bank, and when the bank is after them, then they leave their bank and go to another bank and borrow and pay the other bank. So if you are managing a debt like this, would you call yourself a good manager of a debt or a good manager of economy? And suddenly, you might know that indeed, if your economic management with regards to whether frequency or not frequency, and then the position is that it looks like you've been borrowing to pay debt, and then they call you back and tell you what you're doing is Ponzi financing, would you tell me that does it build on economic ethos? No. So at certain times, it brings people to question whether indeed their competences are not questionable. Sometimes that is my worry. Either it is questionable, or possibly whether their grievances are not been taken, or it could also be that probably they are distinctive fund management from economic management. That could be maybe a very difficult position for which to explain. But from where I sit, I don't see the economy being managed prudently as it should be. And indeed, other countries are not doing the same. If a country would have to run an economy like this, it will run the citizens to death. That is what I see from where